Welcome to another Prince August Toy Soldier Factory production. Today we're going to be painting and priming the recent figures, the US soldiers from the great powers of the 1900s. These are, release numbers are PA851. We're going to be using a surface primer. This is white and it can be painted on the figures quite easily. You need to have the figures nice and clean and dry, and then give a nice even coat over all the surface from head to toe. The primer acts as a surface agent for the rest of the paint. Otherwise, the adhesion won't be very good and the acrylic paint will chip. But with a good few layers of this, one or two layers at least, you end up with a protected surface that the rest of the paint will have a better grip on. This should always be done to any metal surface that you're using before you apply any acrylics. Our first colour we're using is a flesh tone colour, and that will be done to cover the face. Our technique is to paint from inside out, which means we're going to be painting the inner areas first and then working out to the outer details. So the skin, the hands, the trousers, and then moving out to the jacket, and then eventually buttons, belts, and so forth. That way you can overpaint, so that you can fill in any mistakes or errors in your previous underlying colours. Next, we're using a sky blue on the trousers. Again, just apply it evenly. You don't need much water, or if any water, with our paints. They are perfectly good just as they come out of the bottle. You don't need a lot of paint. Metal surfaces like this don't have any real absorption, unlike a canvas, so a small amount of paint will go a long way. We were now painting the gloves white. You can also paint little epaulets and things like that if you want to, but because we're going to be painting later on, those areas are not a high priority because we're going to be overpainting them. Now, there's a white stripe on the trousers, so carefully paint that down. It's important that you go all the way down to the bottom. If there's a slight mistake, you can fix it, but it should be just a matter of a steady hand. We're using a hairdryer between coats as well, so that in case you're wondering why we're doing so fast, we're just using hairdryer to warm it up a little bit between coats, and that dries it out. As you can see, you've got two nice simple lines on each side of the trousers. Next, we're going to use a shade of brown for the shadow under the eyes, and then we're going to use two little white dots for each eye to create the iris around the pupil. Just paint a small shadow under there, and then you can do a few little dots at each side of the pupil. And this creates the illusion of eyes. Simple but effective. It's great when you're producing a lot of soldiers. Next, we can continue on using the colour to paint the hair. Have a nice warm brown for the soldier's hair. Try to avoid painting on top of the skin if you can, since you have already covered that. Take your time. Don't worry if a little bit lands on the hat. With any area that has not been painted yet, it doesn't matter because we'll be painting over it. Ideally, you should always try to not paint light colours on dark colours unless the paint is very thick. But the other way around works fine. We're using a dark Prussian blue for the jacket itself. A good technique is to start painting near the edges first. This defines it a lot easier, and it means that you don't end up accidentally going into areas you don't want. You also have a clear indication of what areas you're actually painting, especially with lots of fine detail. It's a lot easier to do this than to go back over it later on and try to clean it up. Just go over the edges first, and once you've done enough of the edges, you can block in the larger areas quickly. If you find that the paint is not sufficiently thick enough to end up with a nice neat coat, you can give a second layer. There's also nothing stopping you from doing shading, having additional layers in this to create wrinkles or to create shadows, but we're only doing a quick paint example here today, so we're just doing base colors. An economic tactic is to paint multiple figures at the same time. So you have your blue, and you can use that across multiple figures. And by the time you've finished 4 or 5 figures, the first layer will have dried naturally, even without the hairdryer. So if you're doing something like a unit of soldiers, cast them all first, and then you can go through this process one color at a time to all of them at the same time. And that will be economically far better than trying to mix a color just for each figure and then going back and doing the colors all over again. As you can see here now, we're just again overpainting the highest detail, the white on the dark Prussian blue. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that we didn't bother painting in the first place, because we weren't sure what was going to happen when we're going to paint around them. This way we have a nice even white. Now we're applying some black, and that would be used for the holster for his weapon, and also for his shoes. Again, we try to avoid painting the hat and the base because we're obviously holding them and that would be messy. So you can block in the areas around his feet. Don't worry too much if it goes on the base. We're going to be painting the base last. You can, if you want, to attach this with a little glue to a wooden surface, but if you like being able to handle it and you want to see it up close, this is one way to do it. Just leave the base and hat to last, except for fine details. Now some more dark blue on the hat. Because the details are so fine here, we are just going to paint over them. It would be simply too messy to try and paint around them, like the little badge. We can overpaint that afterwards. Finally, some brass. Now the brass is perfect for buttons and emblems on the uniform. Always make sure that the previous layer is dry, and never try to paint over another metallic surface because this can result in a tarnishing effect. So try to paint only metallic on matte surfaces. As you can see, the small details like the buttons and the belt, all these areas can be now touched up, and it really helps make those details pop by having a little metallic paint at it. And finally, when everything else is dry, we then turn towards the base that we were saving until now. This of course can be whatever colour you want, but we're painting it green, and we're just blocking it in carefully. Try to avoid going over the shoes, but again, it is black. If there's a big problem, if a spot lands on the shoe, you can always just go back in and touch it up with some more black paint. Take your time, give it a second layer if you need to. You want a nice even flat tone. Now, there you go. You see all the figures in this range. These are the post 1902 flat cap soldiers. This is the back view of those soldiers. You can varnish them if you like with matte or gloss varnish, or even a mix called a satin varnish, but we happen to like it just with matte. This is the pre-1902 back and front soldiers from the US. Thank you very much for watching. You can find out more from our website www.princeaugust.ie.